The wind that night sounded like grief itself, low, endless, curling around the ranch house as if searching for a way in. Thomas Hale sat in his chair by the window, boots planted on the rough floorboards, his hat shadowing his eyes from the soft flicker of the fire. The flames licked at the wood, but he barely felt their heat. The years had taught him that some kinds of cold couldn't be driven off, not even by a blaze. It had been 8 years since Mary died. 8 years since the laughter had left the house, since the smell of cornbread and lavender soap had faded from the air. He'd built that house with her, with his hands, his sweat, and his heart. He'd sworn they'd grow old together there, and then one rainy afternoon, she'd ridden into town and never come back. Fever took her fast, and he'd buried her beneath the oak tree by the creek, where the bluebells grew in spring. He still talked to that grave sometimes, usually when the nights got long. But tonight, even his voice had given up. The words stuck in his throat like dust. Outside, the desert stretched endless and dark, broken only by the silhouette of distant mesas. The cattle were quiet in their pens. The only sound besides the wind was the old clock ticking on the mantel. Steady, lonely, accusing. Thomas poured himself a finger of whiskey. It burned going down, but not enough to matter. The fire popped. He leaned back, eyes half-lidded, lost in the quiet hum of memory. Then came the sound, faint, so soft he almost thought it was his imagination. A knock, 3 times, weak, hesitant. He frowned, sitting up straight. Nobody came here this late, not unless they were lost or desperate. His hand found the rifle leaning against the wall. He rose slowly, his boots heavy on the floorboards, and crossed to the door. The knocking came again, weaker now. He lifted the latch and opened it a few inches. The wind rushed in, biting cold and full of dust. And there, framed in the glow from his lamp, stood a woman. She looked like she'd been carved from the desert itself, raw, weathered, and impossibly strong. Her skin was pale beneath a layer of grime, her lips cracked, her hair black as crow feathers and tangled by the wind. She wore a torn blanket wrapped around her shoulders, its edges scorched. Her eyes, dark, wide, and haunting, met his. "Please," she whispered, voice trembling like the wind through dry grass. "I need warmth. Just warmth. Please, sir." Thomas hesitated only a heartbeat before he stepped aside. "Get in!" She stumbled through the doorway, clutching the blanket tighter around herself. When he shut the door, the storm swallowed the world outside again. He watched her sway on her feet, then rushed to the fire as if afraid it might vanish. "Sit," he said, pulling out a chair. She obeyed, still shaking. Thomas poured water into a pot, set it over the flame, and grabbed a clean towel from the shelf. He hadn't had company in years, but old habits remained. He remembered what Mary used to say, "If someone's at your door at night, it's because God sent them there." "You hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, though her hands trembled as she reached toward the fire. "No, just cold. Been walking since sunrise." "Where from?" She didn't answer right away. Her gaze flickered toward the window as though checking for something, or someone, outside. "South," she said finally. "By the river." That was Apache land, he knew, or had been. The government kept pushing their boundaries farther every year. Soldiers, ranchers, settlers. They all wanted more land, and the Apaches had been caught in the middle. He'd heard rumors of camps being burned. The kettle began to whistle. Thomas poured her a mug of coffee and set it on the table. She wrapped both hands around it as if afraid it might vanish. When she took her first sip, she winced, but kept drinking. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely audible. He nodded. "Name's Thomas Hale." She looked at him over the rim of the cup. "Nyla." He sat down across from her, studying her quietly. There was something about her, not just her beauty, though it was striking in a wild, untamed way. It was her stillness, the calm in her eyes even after what must have been a nightmare. "You on your own?" he asked. A shadow crossed her face. "Not before yesterday." He waited, but she said nothing more. The fire popped, filling the silence. Thomas leaned back, rubbing a calloused thumb against his palm. You can stay the night. I'll find you some boots in the morning. Fire'll keep through till dawn. Nayla nodded. I'll go when the sun rises. Don't want trouble. He frowned. Ain't nobody looking for trouble out here. You're safe. Her lips curved in something that might have been a smile but didn't reach her eyes. No one's safe. Not in these lands. She sat in silence after that, staring into the fire. He watched her reflection dance in the glass of the window, small, fragile, like a spirit half vanished. Eventually, her eyes began to close, her head nodding forward. You should rest, he said. She didn't argue. When he offered his old wool blanket, she clutched it like it was gold. Within minutes, she was asleep in the chair, breathing slow and even. Thomas sat back, the silence thick around him. He looked at her, at the dirt streaking her face, the faint bruise on her arm, the exhaustion etched into every line of her body, and something twisted in his chest. For 8 years, he'd kept everyone out. He'd told himself it was easier that way, that people only left or died or disappointed. But looking at her, small and vulnerable before his fire, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: purpose. He got up quietly, covered her more tightly with the blanket, then stoked the fire until it blazed bright again. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, the little cabin held a fragile peace. He poured himself another whiskey, but didn't drink it. He just sat, staring into the flames, his mind wandering places it hadn't dared in years. He thought of Mary, how she used to hum when she cooked, how her hands smelled like sage. He thought of what she'd say if she saw him now, the old fool with a stranger sleeping by his fire. But maybe Mary would have smiled. Maybe she would have said, Thomas, that woman needs you, and maybe you need her too. When the clock struck midnight, he finally let his head rest back against the chair. The firelight painted Nayla's face in soft gold, her lashes fluttering against her cheek as she dreamed. He didn't know who she was or what kind of danger followed her, but he knew one thing for certain: his house wasn't empty anymore. For the first time in 8 years, the silence didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a breath held in the dark, waiting to be released. And as the wind howled against the windows, Thomas Hale, the man who'd forgotten how to feel, closed his eyes and listened to the fragile rhythm of another heartbeat in his home. The morning light came pale and cold, crawling slowly across the wooden floor of the cabin. Thomas was already awake, sitting at the edge of his bed, boots half-laced, listening to the faint sounds of movement in the next room. For a moment, he thought it was Mary humming again, that soft tune she used to fill the mornings with. But then memory came back, and with it the ache. He rubbed his eyes and took a long breath before stepping out into the kitchen. Nayla was standing by the window, wrapped in the same blanket from the night before. The early sunlight painted her hair in soft bronze, and for the first time he could see her properly. She was young, maybe in her late 20s, but her face carried the stillness of someone who had lived through too much. Her bare feet rested near the fire, where a new log burned gently. She turned when he entered, her dark eyes calm but alert, as though she had spent her whole life ready to run. You didn't sleep much, he said. She shook her head. Dreams were loud. He nodded, not pressing further. He'd had nights like that too, nights when closing your eyes only brought ghosts. He poured coffee into 2 tin mugs and set one in front of her. She took it with both hands, warming her fingers on the metal. Thank you, she said softly. Thomas shrugged. Ain't much, but it's hot. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that wasn't awkward but heavy with things unsaid. He noticed the dirt under her nails, the small cuts on her wrists, the way her shoulders tensed every time the wind brushed against the door. She looked like someone who hadn't known safety in a long time. After a moment, he cleared his throat. You said they burned your camp. The army. Her eyes dropped to her cup. Yes, they came at night. Said we were trespassing, that we were stealing horses. But those were our lands, our rivers. My brother. He tried to talk. They shot him before he finished. Thomas stared into his coffee, his chest tightening. He'd heard about it, seen the smoke from far-off hills. He'd done what everyone else around here did, looked away. It wasn't his business, he'd told himself. But now the cost of that silence sat across the table from him, breathing the same air. "I'm sorry," he said finally, the words rough and small. Nyala looked up. "Don't be sorry. You didn't light the fire." He nodded, but the guilt lingered anyway. "Where will you go?" She hesitated, her gaze wandering to the horizon through the window. "North, maybe find others. Maybe home, if there's still a home." Thomas studied her for a long moment. "You got anyone left?" "My brother was the last." Silence again. The kind that hums with truth too heavy to move around. The hours passed slow. Thomas tried to work, fixing a broken hinge on the barn door, feeding the horses, but his thoughts kept returning to her. Each time he looked toward the house, he saw her silhouette through the window, still and quiet, like a ghost who hadn't decided whether to stay. When he came back inside, she was sweeping the floor with an old broom. The sight startled him. No one had touched that broom since Mary died. "You don't need to do that," he said. She smiled faintly. "I like to move. Keeps the thoughts away." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You sure you're all right? You could stay another day. Storm's not done with us yet." Nyla looked up at the ceiling as if listening to the wind's low cry. "You'd let me stay?" "Course I would," he said, his voice softer than he expected. That evening, she helped him cook. It wasn't much, beans, salt pork, and biscuits, but they ate together like it mattered. She asked about the ranch, and he told her how he'd built it from nothing, how he'd once thought it would be a home for children. He hadn't spoken those words out loud in years. "Why did you stop?" she asked quietly. He paused. "Mary died. Fever took her. After that, I just kept breathing." Nyela's eyes softened. "When my mother died, I stopped singing for a year. I thought the songs would hurt too much, but they waited inside me. When I sang again, I cried the whole night. It was the only way the grief learned to leave." He stared at her for a long moment, feeling something stir in his chest, something warm, unfamiliar, fragile. Later, the temperature dropped again. The fire crackled louder, throwing shadows on the walls. Nyla sat near it, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. The room felt smaller than before, more intimate. "Thomas," she said quietly, "do you ever get tired of the cold?" He frowned slightly. "Can't say I think about it much." She turned toward him, her eyes steady. "I do. I've been cold for so long I almost forgot what warmth feels like. But last night," she paused, searching for words. "Last night I dreamed of sunlight again." He didn't know what to say. Her words hit something deep, something raw. She hesitated, then spoke again, her voice trembling just a little. "I don't ask for much. Just warmth. I don't mean to shame you or take from you. I only ask to be near your fire tonight. If that's all right?" Thomas looked at her, really looked, and saw not desire in her eyes, but the fragile plea of someone who'd been alone too long. Someone who wanted to feel human again. He nodded slowly. "All right." He spread another blanket near the fire. When she lay down, he lay a few feet away, careful not to intrude. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the fire's soft breathing. Then, after a long silence, Nyla whispered, "You have a kind heart, Thomas Hale. You just buried it with her." He swallowed hard. "Maybe, but you made me dig it up again." She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening in the firelight. "Then I'm glad I knocked." Time slipped by like sand through fingers. Her breathing grew steady, and he found himself watching her, her face calm, her lips parted slightly in sleep. Something inside him, something locked away for 8 years, cracked open. He realized it wasn't love he feared. It was loss. And somehow, this woman, broken and strong all at once, reminded him that pain wasn't the end of life. It was the proof of it. When dawn crept in, the fire had burned low. Nyla was already awake, watching the horizon turn gold through the window. She looked different in the morning light, still fragile but glowing with quiet resolve. "Sun's up," she said. He nodded. "You're really going then?" "I have to. My people will need someone to tell the stories. If I don't go, they'll die with me." He walked closer, his voice low. "Then I'll ride with you. World's no place for a woman alone right now." Her eyes widened slightly. "Why would you do that?" He met her gaze. "Because 8 years is a long time to be dead. Maybe it's time I came back to life." She looked at him for a long moment, then smiled, the kind of smile that carried both sorrow and hope. "Then let's ride." Together they stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The world smelled of frost and dust, but also of something new, something clean. He saddled his horse while she stood beside him, the wind tugging at her hair. As they rode out across the plain, the sun rose higher, lighting their path. Behind them, the cabin shrank to a shadow against the hills. Ahead lay a road neither of them could see clearly, but both were willing to follow. For the first time in years, Thomas felt the cold retreating, not because of the fire, but because of the warmth beside him. And as the desert stretched wide before them, he realized that sometimes the second chance at life doesn't come with noise or miracles. It comes quietly in the knock of a stranger on your door, asking only for warmth.